The majority of CEOs I talk to are deeply concerned with the chaos and division Trump and his supporters represent for the country. Right? Many of them are traditionally deeply Republican. They say, "Great, we're glad that you're out there because you can speak this truth about American business, which we by our positions must be unfortunately silent on."
Reid, great to be with you. Thanks for doing this today.
Bob, always a pleasure.
We have seen an extraordinary series of events this week. You were among the voices publicly supportive of Joe Biden after the debate, and then you came out quite quickly in support of Kamala Harris. I personally was looking forward to a more open process, however messy that might be, that it might add energy to the campaign. You didn't feel that way.
Well, actually, I would have been, and I am open to an open process in various ways. But there were two or three things going on. One is that I think Kamala is an excellent candidate in a additive way to which Biden was a good candidate. I'll go back to that in a moment. And a lot of the folks that people were hoping for as candidates all decided themselves that supporting Kamala was the right thing. So you see a bunch of people like Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, a bunch of great Democratic governors all endorsing Kamala. Kamala is one of the ones who's gone through, national vetting. And so, part of what happens when you go into the presidential race, there's a lot of intense examination, and Kamala has done that. And so I think that's kind of the process reason. Now, the structural reason is part of the reason I was supportive of Biden is because part of what Biden set off against Trump was a combination of decency and unity, more bipartisan legislation than any president in decades, kind of working to bring us together. Now, in addition to that, what Harris brings to the table is you have, in this kind of entertaining American reality television show that is our presidential election, you have a prosecutor against a felon. And the importance thing about the rule of law is actually, in fact, one of the things I think that the central election's about. It's about saying, actually, in fact, trying to overturn an election with an insurrection on January 6th is bad. Actually following the laws of the nation is actually key. And I think that's one of the things that Kamala brings to the picture.
There's been a lot of back and forth about how different parts of Silicone Valley align with the presidential candidates. Elon Musk has been vocal in support of Donald Trump, and Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz also rallied to Trump. There are others like you who are vocal in support of the Democratic Party. How divisive have things become in Silicon Valley? I mean, it is a small place. The impact of it is big, but it's not a big place.
Well, I mean, Silicon Valley has rarely been unified to one candidate, in part because relatively few candidates are as strongly technology building the future. And so, generally speaking, there is always actually some debate within it. Now, this debate, I think, is a little strange because if you consider Trump, one, classically Republicans are the party of business. And so they argue it's business thing. Well, here's a business person who's arguing tariffs and other kinds of things, which are like, anti-business. So it's kind of strange. Donald Trump himself is perhaps one of the very few human beings on the planet who can lose money running a casino. So, it's kind of like also bad on business credentials. And then you go, well, maybe J.D. Vance. Well, but when J.D. Vance says, hey, of all the people that Biden's appointed, he's like, most of them are bad, but the one who's really good is Lena Khan. Now, she is the representative of the kind of thing that I would be doing. So it's a little bit of a strange dialogue.
Because the regulatory environment and things like, that's part of what has made some business leaders skeptical about about Biden and about the Democrats.
People say, well, are you just, so resolutely anti-Trump? It's like, well, actually, in fact, I thought one of the things that he did well in his presidency is like, you want a new regulation, remove an old one. It's a generally good, kind of refactoring and don't allow cruft. I think that the regulatory stuff is good. Now, that being said, what I think people don't realize is that stability, unity, and rule of law is the most important thing for business. It isn't a question of like corporate taxes going up or down by a percentage or an additional regulation or two. Those are important things for business. But the thing that's actually, in fact, most important is a notion of, do you want a stable society? It's what you can invest in. It's what you can hire people in. It's what you can do, all these kinds of things. And that's why, I think Joe Biden has been a great president. And I think Kamala Harris can be a great president because for business, as well as general, because of that specific attribute. We can go into details and say, well, but they're going to add these 3 regulations. And you say, well, those regulations would be probably less good for business. Sometimes, by the way, good, thoughtful business people realize that some regulation is very good. It creates a stable environment. It creates a good transactional thing. It's like, for example, having regulation about food and drug. You may disagree with the intensity of it in some ways, and you may want to say we want to have drugs approved more quickly, both of which I think are very good points and important. But you might say, look, the baseline is good for the overall transactional velocity and stability of society.
So much of America has become like calcified, like that you're either on one, you're either red or you're blue, and there's not a lot of movement back and forth. Does it feel that way in Silicon Valley too? Like when you talk with your colleagues in the community there, is it sort of like 2 different camps, or is there dialogue?
I would say that there are fragments of dialogue. I would say that the people who are more uncertain of the key issues are talking to the folks who, represent, the kind of the camp that I'm in, which is, I believe, stability, unity, rule of law. And then there's people who think that the wrecking ball that is Donald Trump is the right environment for disruptive and, kind of technology. And there's people who talk to both of those. I'd say across it, not as much, because I had a Twitter exchange with David Sachs. I made an offer to go on the All In podcast to talk about it, which, they haven't, even though they accused me of being timid on Twitter, they haven't taken me up on that offer. It's like, your what is it? Your beliefs are where your mouth is, or your boldness is, or something. But anyway, we do have, obviously in this time around, we have a much more set of vigorous voices for Trump than we've had in the previous elections. I think some of it's crypto. I think that the Biden administration has actually mishandled their thinking of crypto in various ways. And so I think there's a bunch of crypto people who are single issue. I think there's others that, kind of have some belief that his wrecking ball is a better strategy. But I think they're mostly under misapprehensions and big in a kind of information bubble. That's part of the dialogue you have. Now, you note that most of the public voices for Trump have actually, in fact, migrated away from Silicon Valley. I guess the last thing I would say is, a number of those voices who've been public about Trump were also public about Trump lost their support because of January 6th, kind of violence and insurrection, and then are not addressing that in their regain of support. And I would, think that would be one of several different points of integrity to say, if you have integrity and you're supporting Trump in this election, you should address that.
When you think about your own role in politics personally, like, I'm not sure we've had a period before where the endorsement of a business leader would get quite as much attention as your statements have sometimes gotten? Like, is that strange for you?
It's very strange. I mean, I'm much more of a technology innovator, business builder, investor. It's the kind of thing that is the more natural use of my talents. But on the other hand, part of what's important, like if this was, um, Republican, Democrat, there's a number of Republicans I've supported over the years. I tend to think it's just great leader, you know, kind of a leader who's a Democrat, a leader who's Republican, a leader who's committed to society. But when it gets down to kind of rule of law, kind of the baseline of the system, then I kind of feel like I have to put a lot more energy than I put in previously. And, kind of to riff on a Vinod Khosla line, I think there's Democrats, Republicans, and felons. Here's a business way of putting it.
Yeah.
Trump would be disallowed from running any public company with his record, right? Like you wouldn't, the rules wouldn't allow him to run a public company. And many of these business people who support him wouldn't do business with him. He's like, okay, this is the person that you're supporting as the so-called business candidate for president, right? It's kind of surprising.
As an investor, you're not personally leading a big group of people. When you talk to CEOs in your portfolio companies and otherwise, like what do you talk about is the appropriate role for an organizational leader? I mean, some portion of every employee base probably supports each candidate. So can you express how you feel as a CEO? Should you?
Well, I think the thing that I've talked to a number of CEOs, and this all the way started back to Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn, when Trump was first elected, is to say, I don't think that it makes sense to kind of articulate, call it, Team X or Team Y, because of not just employees, but customers, investors, et cetera. Like if you just kind of say, hey, I'm oppositional to your team, picking, Yankees versus Red Sox or, kind of equivalent, is kind of alienating in a way that business is supposed to be unifying. That's a good thing to kind of sidestep. You may personally attend a fundraiser, vote, et cetera, but as a leader of the organization, to use the platform is different. Now, that being said, I do think that there's ways to articulate, kind of call it support for America, that if are treated as partisan, then the people who are treating it as partisan, there's something wrong with them. For example, the 2020 election being a kind of a fair and balanced election, and if someone takes exception to that as partisan, you can say, well, that's like saying it's partisan to be pro-business or anti-business or something. And it's like, no. This is just the kind of the fundamental operating system of our country, and belief in the U.S. Constitution is not partisan.
As an investor and a board member, say at Microsoft, you have more freedom than Satya Nadella does to engage in discussions about candidates.
Yes, for sure.
I don't mean to pick on Satya.
No. Well, Satya, one of the great CEOs of our modern times. When you're on a board, you don't speak for the company. You never speak for the company. I don't speak for the company on anything. I don't speak for the company on product releases. I don't speak for the company on, part of the, for example, Microsoft governance from the very first day that I joined is like all board members, you're not supposed to speak for the company ever. But by doing that, that means you just only speak for yourself. I have literally never once said anything more precise about Microsoft other than, well, I think they're very smart about what they're doing with AI, right? Something along those lines. And I think that's right. And that gives me and all board members, and that's true of other public companies and other private companies and other venture firms. And I think it's an ability to speak publicly.
Are there CEOs who talk to you and encourage you to be vocal about the political situation because they can't be?
Very much. I mean, most Look, I'd say that the majority of CEOs I talk to are deeply concerned with the chaos and division and kind of anti-stability and anti-rule of law that Trump and his supporters represent for the country. Right? Many of them are traditionally deeply Republican. The business of America is business. The government should get out of the way of businesses creating jobs and industry, and they are still kind of deeply concerned about the way that Trump and his folks run their elections. They run their support of things like Charlottesville, other kinds of things. And they go, no, this is not what we should be doing. What we should be doing is actually, in fact, not trying to make a division and hatred reality television show, which makes good ratings, but we should be making a good environment for business. They say, great, we're glad that you're out there because you can speak this truth about American business, which, we by our positions must be unfortunately silent on.
We talked earlier this year for the podcast about a meeting you had with Joe Biden about AI and tech development. And you said you were pretty reassured that, despite his age, Biden had a framework for thinking about AI that was forward-looking and people-focused. Have you had any discussions about AI with Kamala Harris? Do you know what her philosophy on tech is?
I haven't had it in depth. Vice President Harris showed up at the UK AI safety meeting in last November. So she's active and thinking about it. And her contributions in the meeting were, hey, there can be all these great things that are created by AI, medical assistants, tutors, et cetera. That's really good. And we just need to make sure that we're bringing all of society along and doing the right kind of guardrails to make sure that the bad potential things, whether it's, kind of racial bias or kind of enshrining the power of the already powerful, are carefully navigated. But I think that I think so. I think she's intellectually interested in, to some degree, since this election has now become a young versus old election, she brings the young, curious vigor into the picture.
You never had any encounters with her when she was in California earlier about technology necessarily?
No, and that was in part because, I was, my general interaction in politics has been, and I would love it to return to kind of like, hey, I'm building really important things for people through business and through technology. And I just support, various kind of great leaders, whether they're political leaders or entertainment leaders or other things as I find them, kind of as a side thing to the job I'm doing. And so that was what I was doing before. And so I hadn't, Vice President Harris and I haven't really talked about that in any depth.
We're about 100 days from Election Day. CEOs know that their first 100 days are often incredibly important. In some ways, Harris is now sort of starting her job in the campaign. Are there models of refounding that the Harris campaign can borrow from? Are there startup principles or blitzscaling principles that could be applied to this campaign at this moment?
Yeah, I think. I think it's use the fact that you only have 100 days as a feature, not a bug. It's kind of a classic entrepreneurship thing, which is like say, well, you don't have the structural advantages that a existing business with all of its customers and capital and everything else has. You have to use your advantages in the field. That means that, among other things, Kamala Harris can now kind of articulate which things she would bring as new things, as different things. That even while being proud of, kind of lowest crime rate in 50 years, lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, and other kinds of things, she can say, and this now is the new things that that we're building towards. And so I think she can use all of that.
So where do we go from here? I mean, just a few days in from some intense tumult, things suddenly seem like settled in some ways for the Democrats. Are there other like plans B that are still bubbling? I know you talk about not just a plan B, but plans B. Are there things still bubbling, or is the VP pick the only thing that's left?
I think there's a lot of stuff that's still game on. I think we're going to have a very interesting 100 days. Obviously, the vice president pick is a very important one. It's top of a lot of people's minds, mine too. But also, like Kamala Harris has this ability to articulate now where she will be new, what she will be bringing to the kind of the renovation and the rebuilding of DC that a lot of American people want to see, and what kinds of things can she do. So there's a ton of stuff that plays out there, and kind of classic startup land. She's going to have to do this in a quick and good versus long, deliberative, and perfect.
Mm. And the blitzscaling idea that it's better to have something imperfect and out there, be embarrassed by your first product. Does that apply in politics?
Well, I think it applies now, and probably applies in politics generally, but it definitely applies now.
Do you have a VP pick that you're excited about? Are there candidates that possibilities that you feel like, oh, these are the folks that I think would be good for this?
I have a number. Not a huge number, but a number that I think would be great. But I think that one of the things that people, like part of what makes me a good board member is that I don't, I understand how to play support to the primary, in this case, the CEO, or in this case, the presidential candidate. And so I play help, not second guesser, not public, like I don't go out and say, well, I think my CEO should hire a new person for their CFO, et cetera, et cetera. It's, those are all background conversations versus foreground ones.
So you may share those ideas with Harris or the Harris campaign, but you're not going to share them with us today.
Yes, you drew the straight line between the dots.
Well, Reid, I know you're crazed these days, so thanks for taking the time to chat with us. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to talk with you, Bob, and look forward to many more conversations.